When you're building a culture of belonging, every word counts. That's why Textio brings the world's most advanced language insights into your hiring and employer brand content. Our industry-leading approach to artificial intelligence and machine learning provides the tools needed to find more diverse candidates. In short, Textio builds more equitable workspaces, guiding businesses and writing more inclusive job posts. And we're building on that success by bringing even more products to the market for all people who share our belief that language matters. Words have power, and at Textio, we harness that power to increase the access and availability of value-driven work for everyone.
Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Thursday night edition of The Access Point. Excuse me. Hope you've been having a good day so far, enjoying this warm weather wherever you are, particularly in the States. We know we're experiencing some extreme weather, extreme heat waves, and you're being safe and taking care of yourself and your family out there. We are excited about today's show, as we are with all of our shows, and we've got a really special guest. And tonight we're going to talk about sort of the halfway point of the summer and what that means for those of you who are working with particularly talented young people and young professionals in your offices at this summertime. Might be summer employees, particularly might be interns, and what we can be doing to make sure we're doing right by them. Let's start off with talking about who we are. This is the Access Point is part of Living Corporate, and Living Corporate is a digital media network consultancy focused on workplace equity and inclusion. Living Corporate centers and amplifies Black and Brown voices in the work of digital media production and business-to-business consulting. The network offers a variety of programming, and tonight, of course, you are here for the Access Point. The Access Point is a weekly webinar focused on preparing Black and Brown college students and early career professionals for the workforce by having the real talks they don't even know they need yet. We're going to focus particularly on the challenges for you, our listeners, are facing as you move through the early stages of your career. Quick disclaimer. The thoughts and views expressed in tonight's discussion do not reflect the view of any organization the host or guest may be affiliated with. Now let's go with introductions. We'll start with Dr. Wendy Edmonds.
Well, good evening. I am Dr. Wendy M. Edmonds, and I am happy to be here. Thank you all for joining us. I am a consultant, a professor, and author. And what is it that I do? Well, there are people that come in and out of our lives all the time. I help you decide which ones are the gems and separate them from the counterfeits.
I needed you so much earlier in my life. I'm so glad you're here. Give my quick introduction, Lonnie Morris. I also am a management professor and consultant. I spend my days working with people who are in extremely great professional positions and helping them understand how to make organizations work better and help you hate your job less. And today's guest is a really, really talented, extremely talented professional. So happy you have time to share with us tonight. So let's introduce Jeremy Hudson. Jeremy, why don't you give a brief intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. First of all, thanks, Dr. Morris, Dr. Edmonds, for having me on. Super excited. I shared earlier, this is my first Twitter space, so I feel like I gotta do a good job for you guys.
Welcome to the party.
Welcome.
It'll be fun. I am a global culture and engagement leader for a technologies company, and I focus largely on the employee experience. That's what I've been in for the majority of my career, and especially since this space has turned. I'm new in this technology industry and worked before. I spent 4 years in the Big Four at Ernst & Young leading their employee experience area also. So really excited to turn the page and look at what's trending in technology and take a look at a new type of professional that's working in that industry also. So excited to chat with you guys tonight.
Thank you so much. That's exciting. That gives us a great place to start tonight. So we're checking in. It's the middle of the summer, thinking about all the incredibly talented young people who are in workspaces right now. And Jeremy, you said you've been responsible for the entire employee experience. So what is really happening say it's July, right? Into July, going into August. What's really happening from an organizational perspective as we think about the people who join us for short periods of time, particularly if they are in college and university spaces to come and work in our spaces? What should we be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I think largely that depends on where those individuals are, right? And I say that meaning where they are in their internship. If this is a junior or a senior individual, you're thinking about assessing them, one, to determine if that's a high potential individual that we want to bring on as a full time employee. And for those individuals, I think one of the best things that you can ensure during this space is that they've got an opportunity to truly see the organization. What I appreciate about what's been changing about internships lately is if you think about when I was in college, I had the internship in a department. It was in healthcare. I had an internship in healthcare administration, and that's where I stayed. What I love about internships now is you get the opportunity to say, do I like accounting? Do I like HR? Do I like marketing? And these interns are rotating through that. And one of the critical components toward the end of that is, I think, to make sure that those rotations that they really enjoyed and those departments that felt like they were a good match, that those two individuals spend more time getting to know each other. Because as you guys know, where we are right now, just in the fight for talent or in the war for talent that's out there, we've got to make sure that not only is it a good fit on the organization side, but that it's a good fit for that intern side. Largely that means, did they have a good experience and did they mesh with the culture, not only of that organization, but also of the team and the peers with whom they'd be working.
Thank you so much. That's a good sort of level set for us to sort of get us on the same page here. So I want to dig a little deeper into particularly around what's happening in our labor market right now. We recognize that there is a high appetite for remote work, at least in some industries, right? I think software development, we see that, IT, we see that, info design, marketing, probably. The June job reports shows us that the labor market is still strong. And I think this might be something that's sort of we're going with now, but maybe sort of carries over with us, that particularly Black and brown employees have high anxiety around layoffs. So when we hear a recession is coming and that organizations are pulling back, we know that we might be early on the chopping block for whatever reasons. So I'm thinking, what should we be doing right now, particularly from an organization space, when we think that our young brown and Black employee interns are up against this maybe imperfect storm here?
Mm-hmm.
What should the employers and the supervisors of these folks be doing to make sure that your interns get the best out of in the summer?
Yeah. Dr. Morris, I'm going to use a term that you've heard me use a lot. And I think this is the best time where our leaders have to have emotional intelligence, right? We've got to be able to connect with those individuals on a level where we're building empathy, but we're also developing trust, right? Because right now we got to have candid conversations. And I'm impressed by what I've seen as a trend in the industry also. And lots of companies saying we've got to go away from a culture of being nice to a culture of being truthful and being candid. And how do we address that? And I think that's a huge thing for leaders right now, is to ensure that they have built a trusted relationship with those interns, so that they can come to them and be transparent about what they're feeling, right? Ambiguity is what often leads to that anxiety. They don't know what's next. They don't know what's coming and what that means for them. If we reduce that ambiguity by setting that culture of candor and transparency, then we start to reduce that anxiety in our people.
Jeremy, one of the things that I love that you say is empathy, right? Because if leaders are going to lead with empathy, that means they're going to have to be transparent. That's new for some leaders. It's also difficult for some leaders to transition into that space where they can build that trust. So that's interesting that you even mentioned that, but that is the direction in order for our young students to feel that they are, one, a part of the organization, two, that they are contributing to the organization, and three, that they are not just disposable.
Yeah, I think what I think is interesting, Wendy, is you mentioned it being challenging, right? And I think so many of us that are in leadership positions have to be able to be uncomfortable with being challenged, right? And we've got to be able to challenge the status quo. And transparency is difficult for those leaders who don't fully understand what it means to be transparent. And I think when so often when people think that we've got to be transparent, they think we've got to share every fear, every concern, or every business conversation out there. But I think that goes back to knowing how to communicate with your team and showing emotional intelligence and having a connection with those team members to be able to understand what's important to them, right? Because often transparency isn't sharing everything that you know, but it's sharing what you know in a way that you know is relatable to that individual, to the recipient of that communication. And I think that's where we get back to that empathy, right? We need empathy to build trust. I think the more of a trusted relationship you have, the more this term transparency seems fearful.
Now, so I like where we're going with this. I want to stick with this a little bit because this idea of being empathetic and transparent and these honest conversations we need to have, those things are not new for our new employees. So everyone from millennials down to Gen Z folks, they're the ones who've been pretty upfront and honest with us, saying, hey, be very clear with you. I don't want to work long hours. I want to go home when I'm done with my work. I want to be able to take a personal day for my mental health. And just, I was reading this in Business News Daily yesterday, that one of the things they said they really dislike is they've got a problem with upper management. Now, it might be broad, but we know that could be the supervisor, the supervisor's supervisor. So all these people who sometimes may have difficulty communicating in an empathetic way, in a transparent way. So what do we need to make sure as we're dropping these key words and key terms means you to operate this way? How can we get them to do that better?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a really quick story because you mentioned it when you talked about kind of just how millennials and Gen Zs operate. I was in a boardroom. Some executives called me in and they were talking about problems that they were having with their teams and not being able to connect with millennials and how the millennials weren't understanding what they were trying to tell them and what they were trying to express to them. And we sat there and we had a 45-minute session where I allowed them to just vent to me and kind of tell me everything that the millennials weren't able to do and how they weren't able to hear. And at the end of that, I reiterated it, made sure we captured everything, right? And then I said, you guys do realize that I'm a millennial, right? And they had no idea just putting it together. I'm like, all right. So I think so often one of the biggest things that we see there is, yes, we all have different types, and absolutely, I am the person who I'm like, yo, I want to be off when I want to be off. I want to make sure these benefits and everything are right. But it's getting to know that, right? It's getting to know what people want. It's getting to know what's important to people. We went from having work-life balance, which I've never believed in that word, but we went to having true work-life integration where there was no separation of work and life. We were bringing everybody in. We knew everybody's pets and the dogs. And I will tell y'all, Jackson knows my teammates, my son, he's 10 months old and he's been on plenty of our calls. So I think just being able to understand that flexibility, being able to be empathetic. But I think the biggest piece of that is you got to be willing to pivot. If you are in leadership and particularly senior leadership who's making strategic decisions, I think you can't be afraid to pivot. And what you've seen largely with the employee market is you've got to, right? Because if you don't pivot and if you don't start to adjust yourself to what's attractive to this generation and to the incoming market, then you're going to find yourself behind. And I think we've seen some shifts in industries out there that were leading industry talent, and that's slowly coming behind because they're failing to pivot and adjust to the market.
So I will say that there's two things to comment on. I think COVID helped us to learn to be flexible. There was no option. We've been home for 2 years. So COVID helped with that. And second is, I've said this before, is that I believe segregating the generations, giving them a title, describing them with specific characteristics has done its damage. And so whenever someone who is in the age group of being a Gen Z, a baby boomer, they are millennial, they are characterized as being people who don't know technology, people who don't want to work, and that's done some damage. And so I'm glad that you were able to sit down and let them vent. But they also have to understand that those characteristics isn't one that fits for everyone in that age group. That's not true. That is their experience, but then help them to see otherwise. We need not to have that generational segregation. I'm over that.
You mean, Dr. Wendy, that as a Gen X person, I can't speak for all the Gen Xers?
I'm sorry.
Because I vent and complain all the time. I thought they all felt the same way. Maybe not.
Yeah,
perhaps. Right.
It's even more interesting. I love the fact that they had no idea that I was a millennial, as they were just stereotyping my entire generation. So I appreciated being able to just shatter that in one meeting.
Yeah, that's really important. So let's stick with this a little bit. As we think about what our young people right now who are in these summer interns or these summer roles and their expectations, we know research shows us that they prioritize diversity and inclusion, right? So they want to be people that look like them in positions of leadership. We know that we already discussed a little bit that they have this disdain for micromanagement and sort of the upper echelons of management. And they've been pretty vocal about dislike of toxic work environments. And that's really important. So I think we all have experienced that in some way, even in places that are pretty cool, right? Have some toxic characteristics. So I'm wondering if you are a manager right now and you're listening to this, and your organization, you recognize your organization has challenges in some of these areas. What can you do from here for the summers out to make sure you've got this incredible intern who's here in our organization and they recognize and maybe have even been pretty vocal about some of the challenges they see? What can you do to seal the deal with that person?
Yeah, that relationship, that's going to be the most important part of anything. For so long, we use resources, right? And that's down to the little stale and the little cold. When we think about it, right, at the beginning of that is the human part, and that's the people. They got to make sure that there's a connection between you and that individual, right? You talked about people want to make sure they're walking into an enjoyable workplace. If you think about this, like my role, my industry, my area of this industry didn't even exist 4 to 5 years ago. And it's a direct response to that. It's a direct response to individuals saying, I have choices of where I want to work, and I want to make sure the place that I work is providing me an enjoyable environment, has a great culture, that I'm aligned with their values. And so the more we can make sure that we are connecting to that, right, and having those conversations with that and making sure that they're aligned to that, the better that's going to be. Long guys, Morris, Dr. Edmonds, you've heard me say it over and over again. That starts at the team level, right? So more than ever, I think managers and direct leaders have the power, right? For so long, we thought, oh, there was bureaucracy and there was red tape because of the things at the time. More than ever right now, the team is what matters. The individuals that you're working with on a regular basis, on an everyday basis, that's what matters. Because if you're only going into the days a week, then you're likely only seeing those individuals, right? If you're not going into the office at all, then you're likely interacting with those individuals the most on Zooms or on Teams or things like that. So the more you can foster that micro relationship with the team, and the more you can foster that family-like or that team-like environment, that's what's going to sell. We've seen so often that interns have turned down higher paying jobs because of the experience or because of the environment that we've been able to create.
Right. That's absolutely true. I have talked to some who have interned, and that's absolutely true, because it wasn't worth the salary was not worth the headache or the negative experience that they encountered during the internship, and it just didn't bring any value to their life. Mm-hmm. And they chose not to go with the organization.
That sounds like they did not learn that from the baby boomers.
Not at all. Not at all. Y'all know there's no 30. You're good to get 5 to 6 years, constantly. The 30 years I sat there because that's a great job. That's a battle more.
Yeah.
But I think back to my experience as an intern, and it was so horrible that I decided not to go into the government. And it was bad because it was nothing to do. It was nothing to do. And there wasn't anything that really challenged me. I didn't like the discussions that were around me. And I knew that at 16 years old, I was not going to do that for the rest of my life. I didn't care what kind of job that was. And I think that it's not a characteristic of a millennial. I think when you're in that age group and you know what you want to do, you make your decision. Mm-hmm. And it is based on your experience.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think so. Think about how impactful it would have been, Dr. Edmonds, if someone had just asked you what you wanted to do, right? Or what your experience was like there, or what was challenging or not challenging for you. Just simply having a discussion could have changed your whole trajectory or the experience that you had with that internship.
Exactly. And being the baby boomer that I am, don't fit any of the characteristics. Let me just say that right now. Let me put that out there.
We know you are a unicorn. We know.
So when they say that baby boomers don't know technology, it doesn't fit, because I have to remind them that we're the ones that discovered that technology and played with that technology and did that technology so that you can have it today. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. So they brought in technology and everybody ran from it, except for me. I just thought this was great and learned it. And I taught the other, they were secretaries in the day, admins, the technology. And it was a wonderful experience that I had for learning for myself. But nobody else appreciated it. Nobody else wanted that. And I just thought, nah, I can't do this. And now look at where we are today.
Yeah. So Dr. Edmonds, I'm hearing you say you've been a doctor your whole life.
That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
That's fair. So I want to bring in something that seems to be very common in conversation right now, and there's some debate around what this means and what it looks like, but I want to contextualize it into this conversation about what's happening to young people in the workplace right now. So the resignation, right? And so hear about this and reading about everyone leaving their job, and we've talked here about how the pandemic has inspired some of that or caused some of that. But I've been reading sort of mixed reviews on what's happening. See, I read something on Vox.com and they were saying, well, the Great Resignation is really looking more like the Great Reflection now, that people aren't just leaving jobs, but thinking more about, what do I really want to do and what space do I really want to do that in, and how can I get the most out of the experience? Saw something on CNBC a couple of days ago, and they said, well, the Great Resignation is looking more like rapid quitting now, that people are kind of hopping jobs saying, nope, I hate it, I'm going to hop to another one, without really anchoring themselves to anything. And then I saw something in Forbes this week that talked about the Great Resignation turning into the Great Uncertainty. That we're really unclear about what's happening because there's so many moving parts. And so when we think about our young people and the things we're discussing right now, sort of finding connections in the workplace, having these honest conversations, expecting or at least desiring transparency from folks. So there are lots of options, right? People can say no and hop to something else or leave altogether. We're seeing a lot of that in the gig economy. So what should those of us who are supervising interns, managing, I know for you, Jeremy, managing the onboarding process for folks to getting them out into spaces when there are so many options available, right? We are not just competing with other internship providers now. We're competing with social media, people who can make money on TikTok, who can go and decide I'm going to have a vending business, or I can get into driving for one of the Uber or Lyft or something like that. How do we make sure that we still continue to pull people along on the career path if the Great Resignation and all the other things are open?
Yeah, I feel like it's 15,000 nicknames, right? You've heard it, all those plus the Great Reshuffling and all these other things, and you know it. I'm a part of that, right? I was a part of what I consider the Great Reshuffle.
That's a new one. I had not heard that one.
You're welcome. when you look at this is why I think more than ever, employer brand is important, right? Because when you mentioned a couple of things, and especially when you're talking about our newer entrants to work, so like our college grads, those individuals who are coming either out of other internships, coming out of master's programs, or whatever that may be, that generation, we can get their attention a lot easier than we could get attention of others before, right? And they like to be felt. Not even I shouldn't say they. Everyone likes to be felt. Teammates like to be felt. They like to know that they're appreciated, and they like social media. So I say, you mentioned the onboarding process. One of the biggest things that I think companies have to be able to do is you got to have a reason for your interns to showcase you, right? You've got to figure out how to turn your interns into employee advocates. So that means from day one, when you start working at whatever company that is, that brand needs to, you got to kind of figure out how they get to drink the Kool-Aid, right? Because the more they're connected, the
Oh,
more they
you
feel
didn't say that,
connected.
did you?
Yeah,
Yikes.
I did.
We'll tell you about that later.
Oh Lord. Okay, we can edit it out. Reverse. All right. No, to feel connected to the culture. How about we leave it that way? But
Yeah.
truly, when you get there, like, what is it that connects you to that brand? That needs to be a box on their door with a T-shirt with something that they can post on social media and TikTok when it's opening. I can't tell you how many meetings I've had at work about what should a box look like when the person unpacks it, because we know it's going to go on social media. Literally what happens when that box is unpacked, and then that brand is tagged, and now that experience is being shown across social media and is being enjoyed by individuals in that generation, right? That experience is what's being showcased. That connection helps, right? I think some of the other piece of it is you can't be afraid to fail. You talked about those gig economies and the great uncertainty. There's just going to be some time where, individual, we're going to have to try it. This is going to be a costly restructure, whatever we're calling it, reshuffle, resignation period. It's going to be costly for a lot of organizations because, as y'all know, it costs a lot to hire people, right? And the cost of hiring people is increasing because of what I just mentioned, all of these experiences that have to go along with hiring people. But I think you figure out, one, is that a cultural fit, right, on both ends? So I think that's going to be extremely important. But man, you just got to care about people, like show people that they matter, that they're more than just a job. That's one of the biggest things that we hear. People want to know they're more than just a job, right? Because if they feel like they are just a job, or they feel like they're just a task, then they can go do that for any other company. And 9 times out of 10, if they're leaving, they can go do that for probably a little bit more money, right? Because they can probably get a little money if they jump. Or they can say, I can make this same thing by, you mentioned it, doing Uber, and I don't have a schedule, and now I got flexibility. So that's also why it's important to figure out, like, is flexibility important? And I listened to the director of culture, or the SVP of culture for the Atlanta Braves, made a comment the other day that I really appreciated. And she talked about how it can be both. You can create an environment where individuals can work and can enjoy their work and can still have time to play in the space that they want to play in, right? So if you want some gig work, or if you want to have a side job for so long in corporate, that's been things that we've talked about. No, you shouldn't do both of that. We figure out how to do that, right? Because ultimately, if they have to make the choice, then, we don't want that gig economy, that gig job to only be the choice. Why can't it be a both option?
That's breaking tradition. That's walking away from tradition.
Dr. Wendy, you know I like to shake the table now.
Yeah. That is breaking tradition right there. And you are looking at talent acquisition as being complementary to the brand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm glad you got us there, because the next thing in my notes to talk about was polyworking. And I hadn't heard that term until recently, but you just sort of introduced that in what you described, Jeremy, that this is a real thing, right? That people are choosing not to have a goal, and I guess in this realm, monogamous relationship with their one employer, but instead to have part-time jobs in multiple places, and it might be through some other things that create a different type of career experience rather than just the one. And so if you are in the organization right now and you aren't considering that, or if you are a young person who is going into an organization as an intern or for the summer, or you're finishing and you're thinking about this, what's the best way to sort of navigate that? how do we get the best of both worlds?
Yeah, yeah, and that's Dr. Edmonds mentioned it. It's breaking tradition, right? So it's something that you ride the wave, because there's a lot, or not ride the wave, but you ride that line of have that conversation up front. I'm going to, especially any of our young professionals who are entering it, to have a conversation up front about whether or not that can happen, right? Because there's so many opportunities for conflicts of interest or non-competes or other things like that, and we don't want any of our young professionals to get into those. So if you do plan on doing that, ask, right? Ask your manager about it. Have those conversations up front about what happens if I am working another job. What do I need to do? And so often it's just report it, right? Just to ensure that there's not a conflict of interest. But number one, have the conversation. Number two, I think everybody's got to be real with themselves. My wife will tell you, I tell her all the time, there's no such thing as multitasking, right? We cannot do two things at once. So I'm not
Say
saying
that one more time. Just say
For the
that
people in the back.
one more time.
there
Yes.
it is. So when I've heard some of that, I've heard some people who are trying to work multiple jobs at the same time, right? And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, like, you've done this Monday through Friday, you've got your thing, and then on the weekends maybe you do Uber Eats or after work or something like that. That's very different, right? But you've got to be able to balance it for two reasons. Something's going to happen at some point. Something's going to slip. Something's not going to be the best of the best. And if you are entering that work market, you got to know that it's a Shark Tank out there, right? Especially right now. You got to be on the best of the best, creme de la creme. So you don't want to slip on that end of it. But then you also don't want to have workplace burnout so soon, right? We've seen so many people and young people who had 2 or 3 internships, which, okay, but then by the end of that internship period, they're completely worn out and they're still uncertain market. So it sounds good, and I know they're chasing the bag, right, Dr. Morris? But sometimes that bag is not worth it. So make sure you know up front. So.
I'm exhausted just listening. I feel like I need a vacation right now.
I'm with it.
My gosh, that's a lot. But it also made me think, right, that there are probably so many more of us that are in this poly working predicament that we haven't acknowledged, really, and that we definitely haven't declared to our employer. So this is, you're definitely right. This is about breaking the mold and having new conversations, and it relates to what you talked about, Jeremy. This reshuffling, right? We are creating a new workforce and new expectations for work that typically we'll see some organizations that we see all the time will die out because they won't adjust in those ways, right?
Yeah. Now you asked a very good point. I know it's probably some people saying, yeah, we're not going to be able to do that, right? That's the other piece of it. You've got to have a culture that allows you to do that, and goes back to what we were talking about, being transparency and trust and honesty, so that individuals feel okay coming to you and having those conversations.
That makes me nervous. Right. Just thinking about the types of organizations that I've worked with, the types of clients I've had, and their organizations they've been in. That is a very scary thing, and that can be a scary thing not for people who are seasoned in their careers. So I can't imagine what it's like for someone who's newly entering the workforce, thinking, "Well, although we've said of our younger folks are pretty forthcoming and transparent about what they want, but it can be scary to say, hey, well, I'm going to do this job here, but I'm also going to do these other things, because I'm imagining what's happening in the background, right? Where they're thinking that people on the team are thinking you aren't contributing, or at least they'll begin to classify you as you aren't contributing as much because he's over here doing this other thing. Or you can't come to this function we're having on Saturday, which is a traditional workday for other people, because you have your other job, right? In air quotes. So there's a lot more sort of the psychological safety about just wanting to be honest about that.
Yeah. And it's a big piece, and it's so much gray right now, because so many of us are changing cultures, and I'm using air quotes right now because some of it's lip service, right? And so, but
Yeah.
we've got to be able to back that up. So if we tell our people it's okay to do it, if that's the policy across the board, it's okay to do it. You guys know most often where the challenge comes is right what you just mentioned. When I go to my manager, now I'm concerned because of what my manager is going to say or what my teammates say. So that's why I say it's not a flip that switches overnight. That's a cultural change that's got to come top down, and it's got to come where everybody, these managers who've been in this organization for 40 years, have to be able to understand that this is how we do things, right? And they've got to be able to get on board with that. That's difficult. That is a difficult cultural shift, though.
And Wendy, I'm thinking this, right? Because we see this often in organizations where the organization might create a policy statement that is flexible enough so that different units apply they see fit. That might relate to your geography, it might relate to your business process, but you can take this language and then apply it. And then what happens when we do work in equity in the workplace, what we find is that people are having very different experiences around that language that was designed to be flexible to give people autonomy in how to implement and execute. But now some people are having a pretty good experience with it, while other people feel that it is straining. What do we do about that?
People, right? I think it goes back to that because when we had our son last year, when I worked for EY had a policy of 4-month parental leave, right? We got the same parental leave regardless whether it was maternal or paternal. So I was able to figure mine out. I took a month at a time and then I worked every other week. I did that because my leader, that she was okay with it, right? She understood what that meant for me. She was okay with that flexibility. I had another friend who worked for the organization who had a more challenging time, not even doing it, but this is just having the conversation. So it's got to be people. We talk about all the time how we're shuffling things around and we're shifting culture. Well, part of that comes with reorienting and reacclimating our people to that culture, right? If we got a manager that's been there for 25 years and they're doing things the way they've always done it, well, if we're shifting, we got to figure out what does leadership immersion look like for those individuals that have to also shift their mindset. So again, I think it goes back to making sure that at that team leader level or making sure that at that direct reporter level that there's buy-in of those policies, because otherwise, I mean, it's great to put it out and it's great to be able to say in your employee pitch that, hey, we got flexible PTO and you can do whatever, but if you can't take it, that's ultimately going to become that reputation, right? You mentioned millennials and Gen Zs and having no problem voicing their opinions. Well, I can guarantee you that if something happens that's contradictory to what the org says, then that's going to be on Fishbowl and Glassdoor real quick.
I think that also speaks to that bad word, work-life balance. Work-life balance really, to me, just gives a clue that you got to choose. You have to choose one over the other, which one you're going to give more to for that balance. The way you are speaking of leadership immersion is directly related to building wellness in the workplace. It should not be something that is separate. It is something that is doesn't look the same for every person, which is why you have to get to that point where you have built this relationship with each of the individuals that may report to you, so that you can, when they come to you with any situation, that you can be flexible enough with the schedule, with the policy, to follow the policy, but I mean, make sure that it's flexible enough to accommodate their needs. It isn't worth losing an employee. Like you said, there's costs associated with it. There's that intelligence that goes right out the door. Otherwise, I mean, you're losing so much. So it's safer to build in wellness every day in the workspace.
Yeah, I mean, if we want our people to bring their whole selves to work, to be 100 when they come, we've got to allow them to be that, right? Like, we're not robots. I agree with you. I hate work-life balance, right? I've never believed in that. It's to me, we've got to be able to integrate it, right? Because balance sounds like we're doing 50-50. We don't do that. You guys know it. If that happens, that means when my cell phone goes off at 7 o'clock, then I shouldn't answer it at night.
Right.
But that happens. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's another piece that you've seen a lot of, and sometimes we see some lip service because with the employee wellness piece, Wendy, because people love to throw, oh, we've got these resources and we've got these resources, but if you're not really helping your people understand what it means and how to utilize them, then I question, was it really there, or was it just to say, hey, we've got this?
Yeah. Is it a checklist, or is it really part of the fabric of your organization?
Yeah.
So I was reading something earlier this week, and they says that 40% of U.S. workers are considering quitting their jobs in the next 4 months. Right, this is not a passing trend. So if people are on the edge and looking to quit for all these reasons that we're talking about, so two sides of this coin. If you are someone who is supervising or managing interns in your space, and you recognize that this is not a good fit, or that they do not intend to come back with you for the next summer, or do any work with you continuing in the school year, without choice, what conversations should you be having with them right now?
Yeah, I think that goes back to where you are with them, right? Because if you're mid internship, then you should have already started to build some type of relationship where you can have that, right? And where at this point you should probably have already at least had a 60-day check-in to talk about some of those things. Where you mentioned the key word, if you're an observant leader, then you're starting to notice some of those things. And I think that goes back to the candor and having that candid conversation about their experience. Because so often I've heard people say, actually, I heard this earlier today, someone talking about, if you realize this person's not all the way in, then it's time to move on to the next one. Well, okay, so then what happens if that intern who I know may not be a fit for me, right? But is a great person, but may not be a fit for my organization. So I say, I'm not going to spend any time working with them. I'm going to just let them have whatever experience they have. And I work with other people. I guarantee you that person's then going to go and talk negatively about the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're a fit or not, we still need to make sure that they're having an enjoyable experience, because they could either go to the organization that they thought they would really love and realize that experience is nothing like that experience that you were able to provide, or they can go to their roommate who's also considering where they want to go. And then again, that person becomes an employee advocate. So I think regardless of, if you realize they're going to be a fit for you or not, you've still got to have that candor, and you've still got to make sure that throughout that experience that they're going to leave and be an advocate for your experience.
I also think that working with interns, you have to help them to navigate the unpleasant, right?
Mm.
And be able to discern when it really is time to leave. Everyone knows that every job has something. Even if you love your job, there's something. Mm-hmm. And helping them to navigate that is really new. Is new for them. Politics, company politics, can be brutal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think we also have to coach them in understanding the difference between politics, navigating politics, and toxicity. Mm-hmm. That's very key to me, because you can spend the time because it is convenient, and perhaps you're young enough to do that, to move around. But how do we help them to build stability? How do we help them to do that? And that's where the networks come into place. That's where mentors come into place. That's where relationships come into place. So that's part of what I think leaders should do as well.
I think we got to be candid about something. And this is what I will say as a Black professional that I wish I had learned much earlier. You mentioned, Dr. Wendy, the word mentor, right? We've all heard mentor. We know what it is. Everyone should have some type of mentor, right? But I didn't learn into the latter part of my career about career sponsors, right? Career sponsors, those individuals who are actually going to put their name on the line for you, who are actually make those phone calls. And I found out about that because of another Black partner who was working at the firm that I was working at the time. And it's one of those things that's so often a hush-hush situation, right? Yes. We got to figure out how to make that work. And we got to figure out how to make sure that around individuals much earlier get on that path towards sponsorship.
That's absolutely true. I'm gonna go ahead and talk. I'm going this statistic, and I'm gonna bring it to you based on what you just said. Yes.
So what I hear you both saying is it's okay that your intern did not like the job, but they should still leave feeling positive about the organization.
Yep.
Right. This work isn't what I want to do. I'm glad I had the opportunity to be here and here instead of feel out. Not for me. I want to do something different. But the people were very nice.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, advocacy on everything, and that's why you'll see so many companies, just as much as we're focusing on onboarding, have also built out that exit process that looks so much like the onboarding process, because you still want that employee to be a voice for you, to speak positively about you, and these alumni networks that are being built, even the interns, right? Interns, even if you leave there and you decide that that's not a right fit for you, you still have access to that alumni network and the resources that come with those alumni networks. So, if your company has that and that's set and you're setting it up the right way, you're continuing to build that pipeline for returners also.
That's good. That's really good. So I know we're waiting for Dr. Wendy to come to find us statistics for us.
This is gonna be a good stat.
I know. We need an applause track. You got it? And you ready?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. So I've got this list of things that I've read. So two different places, right? So there's one, and this actually came from Inside Higher Ed, which is an interesting place for this information, but really focused on the university and college space. But it talks about some organizational lessons from this transition of people out. And that's why that's sort of keeping what we're talking about. Not that they're necessarily going to leave forever, but definitely as they leave for the summer, as they close out the summer, move back into the university spaces or on to something else. And they've got 4 things that sort of key organizational lessons. And I'm not particularly focused on those. I'm going to give them to you, but I'm really curious for both of you missing from this list. So this list says the high-level organizational lessons we should learn as people are trained. Part of all of this is about succession planning and onboarding, right? So having a plan for onboarding. You just said having an exit plan as well. Documenting, planning and strategy, and having systems access and cross-training for people in job alignment. And I thought, well, that's a cool list, but it seems a little blah to me. So what else, as we're thinking about people moving out from the summer and moving into the rest of the year, what are those organizational lessons that we need to take away from what's happening right now?
I think we can't lose their attention. That's one of the things that I think is immediately we've got to figure out how to keep them engaged, because so often already with brick and mortar, out of sight, out of mind, right? But when I can just close that laptop and hand it out, then truly out of sight, out of mind. So how do you keep them top of mind? How do you keep them engaged, whether that's activities that you're doing on the campus or virtual engagement activities or something? You've got to keep that experience with them. You've got to keep it top of mind.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking too, inclusion. So why do we have to think of the activities? Why not let them lead?
Come on now.
Activities. Let them create what that activity looks like. So let's hear from them.
Yeah,
you're talking shaking the table again. You're talking about actually listening to people.
She just flipped the whole table over right there. Huh?
So here's the statistic I was looking for. So we know that diversity is very important. Even research shows that companies that are more diverse are more successful. However, when we look at the numbers, 59.5% of Black students and 53.3% of Latinx students participate in internships compared to their white counterparts at 68.2%. But this is still due to the struggle with inclusion, because the article that I'm reading from is Internship Opportunities for Students of Color. And what the research showed is that they're relying on the hiring practices such as referrals. And so that gives the advantage to white candidates over those who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So back to what you said, that sponsors are very important. There's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Yeah. And companies have to be open if they really want to be the company and the organization that fosters inclusion. You have to think about your hiring practices. How are you acquiring talent? And are the sponsors bringing the same kinds of people? Those are things to look at.
Yeah. 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 I think, and we, when we get in these positions and the opportunity and have these opportunities, I think we've also got to remember, like, we've got to remember those stats, and we've got to remember that, because it's one thing for us to talk about it, but we've also got to reach back, and we've got to be able to extend those opportunities. I had a young man, I was at a convention for work, and he was the valet. And this young every day had a wonderful conversation with me. And then I think I dropped my business card out, and he picked it up and saw it and started talking to me about how he wanted to get into a Big Four firm. And every day that I was there, he had some type of conversation. And I said, you know what, shoot me your resume, let's talk. Honestly, I thought that was going to be the end of it. But his persistence and what he was doing when he was contacting me and reaching out, and the conversations that he was having, I knew this young man had something in him that I couldn't let, like a talent that I could not foster, right? And so I had that opportunity, and I went to our global TA director, and I was like, hey, I know internship is over, but I got a kid that we need. That was 2 years ago, and he emailed me before I left the firm to let me accept his full-time offer as an accountant there. So we got to do that more often.
Wow. That is the
I'm going to email you my resume.
Right.
We're not hiring. No, we're not hiring.
Oh, that's funny. So, all right. So as we think about sort of closing out this conversation, we've got maybe about 5 minutes or so left. I want to raise something that you may not know. July 28th, so coming up, is National. Oh, well, that's not the favorite time. Okay. It's National Intern Day. Did you know that?
Did not.
We learned something together today. See? July 28th is National Intern Day. So for those people who are listening or who might listen to this later who also don't know, and when we're picking this up the morning of July 28th, what should we be doing to celebrate our interns right now?
I think you should, first of all, if you have an internship program, that should be built in, right? Like, moments that matter and celebration should be already built in. At this point in the summer, it's about finding out what they enjoyed and making sure that they spend time with those people, right? Getting ready for those offboarding practices, which so often, again, looks like onboarding. Take them out to lunch, figure out what they truly enjoy, get that individual one-on-one, utilize that relationship that you built to really just get them to talk to you. Like, this is the piece. Dr. Wendy mentioned it earlier. We actually get to listen, and we find out, what's happening, not only for that particular intern, can we, retain them if they're a high potential employee, but we can adjust for what was great about that experience. So I say meet with them, let them talk, and actually listen.
And I would say to pass that baton to the next person, meaning that introduce them to someone in your network so that they are expanding their world, their experiences, their contacts, to help them, if they never come back to the organization, they do have some contacts other than you to go to the next level.
That's powerful. See, both of you are brilliant, because I would have just said give them the day off.
See, that's why we are.
You know what?
You hit on something that I do believe in, more importantly, and that's the one nugget that if I could leave nothing else, it's to build out your relationship map when you get somewhere, right? Because even if you don't stay, like, start that network, start contact, I'll start building those connections. Like when you start there, have a relationship map of who those individuals are, why you want to connect with them, what you want from them, and what you can also learn from them, and make it clear when you meet it, right? When you meet them, because that can go with you, whether you stay or not, right? If you stay, then you've started to build networks within the company. But if not, you just mentioned it, you start to get those external relationships that you can come back to, or that you can even start maybe building mentorships or things like that with. But start building that network early.
That's right.
This is why I enjoy talking to y'all so much. Any final comments?
This was fun. I knew it would be fun with Dr. Edmonds. I questioned if it would be fun with Dr. Morris, but it worked. It was fun.
Yes. And we will always celebrate National Intern Day rather than your birthday.
Oh.
And a pre-happy birthday.
Yes, pre-happy birthday to you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining us today. So this is the Access Point. We hope that you'll be back to join us next week and bring a friend. You can connect with us through the Living Corporate Network, our social media channels. On the web, we are livingcorporate.tv. On LinkedIn, it's Living Corporate. And for Instagram, it is Living Corporate. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Dr. Wendy. Thank you, Jeremy, for your brilliance and joining us tonight. Everybody, have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
This episode of Living Corporate is brought to you by Blind. Blind is a safe, trusted community of more than 5 million verified professionals. Head over to teamblind.com to get the latest insights into salaries, company reviews, and interview experiences at thousands of companies worldwide.